One of the main themes of Festivaletteratura this year is the border, seen as both a physical entity and a personal boundary. So in what ways do your works, and especially How to Stop Time, represent the illusion of this boundary, do you think, or of what is perceived as different?
Okay. Yes, well, it's a book about borders in lots of ways, in the sense that the main character, Tom Hazard, he is a refugee who's literally crossed a border when he was young, but also many, many international borders. And also, I hope I'm someone who likes to ignore creative borders in terms of like genres and the type of book it is. So hopefully this is a book that crosses many borders, from like romantic fiction, historical fiction, literary, commercial, science fiction, thriller. It's kind of crosses over and is everything. And I feel like I'm someone who definitely feels more good is done in ignoring borders.
Yeah, as we saw and as we heard before.
Yes.
So in your career, or in your pathway, if we can say, as a writer, who are the literary muses that inspired you the most, apart from Shakespeare, obviously?
Oh, all kinds of things. Lots of poets. There's an American poet, Emily Dickinson, who has always been an inspiration for me. I write children's books as well, so people like Roald Dahl. I'm in Italy, so I will say Calvino as well, Italo Calvino, because Invisible Cities is one of my all-time favourite books. And all kinds of people, really. But generally, I tend to like people who don't fit very easily into one definition. There's an English writer who's now dead called Graham Greene, and I've read a lot of Graham Greene. I studied him at university, and he was a writer I related to. His books are quite miserable. They're more miserable than my books, but his power at description, at comparing real-life things to abstract things was amazing. There's a line of Graham Greene where he says that I drank the whiskey down like damnation, and that's one of my favourites.
So The Last Family in England and Dead Fathers Club draw from two Shakespearean plays, so Henry IV and Hamlet. How important is it for you to make the readers aware of your rereading the classics and the connection between the classic work itself and its rewriting?
I don't think it's incredibly important for them to sort of like come to my books having to know the other things. I think more for me, I find a lot of creative inspiration from sort of messing about with and stealing things from people and playing about. And in my early career, it was very much, my first two novels were based on Shakespeare plays. And as I've sort of progressed as a writer, I use Shakespeare in different ways. For instance, in How to Stop Time, it's not based on a Shakespeare play, but Shakespeare becomes a character in. So we actually sort of humanize Shakespeare. So I sort of take ownership of him, because in Britain, Shakespeare's a sort of big titan that we're all in the shadow of. So it's quite fun to sort of disrespect him a little bit playfully.
So Henry V seems, on the other hand, a possible key of interpreting your works, which we could almost compare to 21st century fairy tale. Yes. I'm saying that because in Henry V, the chorus discusses probably for the first time the temporary suspension of disbelief. So how important is it today to maintain the reader's suspension in their act of reading, in your opinion?
I tend to write for adults almost as if I'm writing for children. For instance, like children kind of know sometimes that a story isn't real. They know that the trolls aren't real. They know that the elves aren't real. But they take the reality of the imagination, if that makes sense. So I'm not wanting to necessarily make people believe that there are 439-year-old human beings like there are in my novel. But I think fiction can have a deeper truth that's not necessarily realistic, but the emotions are realistic. I think there has to be something real that people connect with. Even if it's a book just about unicorns, there has to be some kind of connection for people, some kind of emotional thing, which makes it human. Whether you're writing Lord of the Rings or the screenplay for Star Wars, it has to have some sort of emotional truth.
A sort of hook
Yes.
to reality, in a way. And so how did the idea that then became How to Stop Time first emerge? And what was the moment when you felt that your project had to become a tangible thing and be shared?
Yeah, that's a good question. I write books, different books at the same time, so I didn't know How to Stop Time was going to become a finished novel for a long time, because I had another novel I was writing which I thought was going to be finished, and I wrote 30,000 words of this other book, and then it just wasn't working. And then I had this old idea I'd had a long time ago about this really, really ancient man who didn't look ancient. And I didn't have the story, but I had the voice. And sometimes it's more important to have the voice than the story. And that's what was the incentive. That's the one that just wrote itself. It wasn't hard. It was just it was hard to research, but the voice was just there. So that's the one I remember.
And a lot of research, I guess, because you use a lot of different historical frameworks.
Yes. I mean, there's something like about 15 different time periods. So it's like researching 15 historical novels in one, but there has to come a point with research where you just stop and are prepared to get a few things wrong and not being too faithful, because there's nothing worse sometimes than when you're reading a book and the research kind of drowns it out. I wanted it to have the lightness as if I was writing about the present, even though it's the past.
And talking about writing, do you have any tips for aspiring writers?
My main tip is really boring, but it's simply to write the book you would most want to read, which sounds really simple, but I think a lot of people, and certainly me when I was younger, you start writing and you get a kind of a writer version of stage fright, and where you feel like you have to be this author person, and it's like you're putting on a voice. And actually, I think with writing, it's almost taking away a voice and trying to find the most natural version of you, and you're just telling a story. You forget about writing a book, you're telling a story. So it's as old as sort of sitting around the campfire and entertaining people. And I try and forget all the sort of marketing terms around books and what type of book it's going to be and where it's going to be in the bookshop or the library, and just think of just telling a story to people.